To break down what we know about this indictment thus far, let's bring in an NBC News legal analyst, Misty Marris. Misty, talk to us about how unprecedented this is. I will note NBC News has reached out to James Comey. We have not heard back from him or anyone representing him thus far, but in the past, he had denied lying under oath, telling Ted Cruz in that 2020 congressional hearing that he stood by his previous testimony. Talk to us about what this means. How big of a deal is this?
Right. So this is a huge deal. And we knew that there was an investigation that was going on into these charges against James Comey. And really what's unique about this particular case is the path, how we got here. So this is brought in the Eastern District of Virginia. And the U.S. Attorney, Eric Seibert, has stepped down. And the reporting is that the reason to step down was that he was hesitant to bring these charges against Comey under prosecutorial discretion, which says ethically you have to be able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law in order to bring these types of charges. Now, he was replaced with a new U.S. attorney who has now moved forward and brought this to a grand jury. So this is the path that got this here is going to be a significant part of the challenge James Comey will likely bring in response to what is now an indictment.
What do you think the federal grand jury was able to see and consider here in making this determination? And remind viewers, when it comes to an indictment, how often do those happen when something is presented to a federal grand jury?
So an indictment is a very different process than a trial. The standard of proof is much lower, the lowest in the law, probable cause. It is very easy to get an indictment in a federal grand jury. Federal prosecutors do not have to do much to secure that. And they do not have to present any and all evidence that they have in their possession. It is a one-sided process. The defendant is not a part of it. It's a secret process. And they don't have to present anything that is in favor of the defense. They're presenting their case from the prosecutor's perspective. We don't know what is in that grand jury indictment. We know the charges involve false statement, obstruction of justice. If we see the indictment, we'll see what the basis is, some of the evidence that the grand jury saw. But again, that's a percentage of what might be in the possession of federal prosecutors.
Okay, Misty, stay with us because I want to also bring in NBC News correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Kelly, walk us through what we know at this hour and what you have been able to gather from speaking with your sources.
Well, it has been a flurry of activity. We now have from the Justice Department a release that combines some of the details about the specific counts in the federal code that this indictment reflects. It deals with what they say are serious matters of releasing sensitive information, obstructing a congressional inquiry, and false statements. The backstory on that is former director of the FBI, James Comey, was testifying before a congressional committee and was asked about disclosures that might have been authorized to the media. And he said that he did not authorize disclosures. We believe that is the subject matter that results in this indictment. This had to do with the Russia investigation, something that President Trump has long been furious about and wanting to see debunked or dismissed in any way possible. That, of course, dealing with potential ties between Russia and his 2016 campaign. So next, we are awaiting to hear any kind of response from Comey's counsel. He, of course, himself is an attorney, but he has legal representation. We would expect to hear from them at some point about next steps. This will also result in a chain of steps that will come in terms of seating a jury. So all of the public statements that are being made, whether posted on social media, the political reaction that's happening. We're seeing some of that from members of Congress so far. Democrats calling it politically motivated, Republicans calling it long-time justice waiting to be fulfilled. So a stark divide in how people are seeing these set of facts. And then ultimately, the process would proceed to trial. So a jury would have to be impaneled, a case presented, and ultimately the finders of fact would be those jurors in a federal court to determine if, in fact, they find there's enough evidence. Ethically, prosecutors are required to believe that they have sufficient evidence to bring a case. As Misty was explaining, there are certain dynamics to the grand jury process that is sealed and secret that does not necessarily mean every indictment leads to a conviction. And in fact, the Justice Department points out anyone accused is presumed innocent. Politically, this has so many repercussions, and it is certainly a point in history to have someone who served at the highest levels of the Department of Justice himself, then as FBI Director, and now on the other side of this, accused of 2 federal crimes. Ellison?
And Kelly, in terms of what could potentially happen here next, based on what we know right now and what we think we know, at the heart of whether or not he lied in his testimony to Congress, it would be Andrew McCabe, right, the former FBI director who had contradicted allegedly some of the statements that Comey had made. Do we expect to hear from him at some point? Could we see allegations related to what he possibly said or didn't say about what happened during that testimony in 2020 and even earlier?
Well, I don't want to speculate about others who are not involved in this indictment in terms of that. But you are referencing sort of the, let's put it in the commonplace story of what we believe the events were. That was part of the congressional testimony that Andrew McCabe, who was the number 2 at the FBI, he is no longer at the FBI. And could be a witness, perhaps. We'll just have to see how it plays out. I don't want to get ahead of the facts that we know. But certainly it is remarkable to have a former FBI director accused of these crimes. There's been years of tension and political back and forth, and Comey has written books. He's spoken out publicly. There was a lot of attention around a social media post referencing 47, the number of the current president, in terms of how many presidents in office. That got a lot of attention. So all of these things are happening in 2 separate spheres. The political sphere, which includes an active social media environment, and then the legal sphere, which will have the rule of law, the procedures in court, and all of those steps that will have to be followed to an outcome yet to be determined. Ellison?
All right. Yes, so many unknowns, but certainly an unprecedented moment in this country's history. Misty, before we go, let me ask you, what will you be looking for in terms of what happens next here?
So Kelly laid it out, all of the social media activity that we're seeing. I expect Comey's first steps to be try and get this indictment thrown out. Now, that is an uphill battle because the standard of proof is so low. It's a probable cause standard in a grand jury proceeding. But I would expect an argument on selective prosecution, that this is a political prosecution. I would also expect, once we see the indictment, that his legal team will be going through it with a fine-tooth comb to say, is there enough evidence to substantiate the grand jury finding, and looking to see if this case can be thrown out at the earliest stages. Otherwise, it is absolutely the case this will be on its way to trial. The standard of proof so much different in a courtroom, beyond a reasonable doubt. And false statement cases, very, very difficult to prove. This is not vague questions and sloppy answers. This is a statement that was false and was intentionally false. It's an intent crime. So this is a difficult case to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Long road ahead for this case.
All right. NBC's Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, NBC legal analyst Misty Marris, thank you both so much. We appreciate it.